So let's just go ahead and jump right into how this is going to flow. If you've attended our webinars, you sort of understand how we like to structure these. But let's just go ahead and kind of get started. So just an overview slide. So this is a reminder of who is involved in the PRD program. Of course, we're located in Oklahoma City in the Aviation Data Systems branch. I'm, of course, Chris Morse. I am the PRD program manager. I'm assisted by Stacy Smith, who's also in our office. And then we have another group of folks that help us with the PRD support, emails, and that sort of thing. They're also on the webinar today. They'll be answering some of your questions in the chat box. So big thanks to them for helping us out today. So regarding questions, we're not going to use the hands up feature for this. If you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A chat box. And then that way, the PRD support folks can respond to your question, either live during the presentation, or if we're not able to get to your question, it allows us to save the question and then we can answer it after the webinar, normally by email. Well, we send to email folks just direct a few days after the webinar and try to answer your question for you. If you have questions that you think of later, tomorrow or whatever, you're obviously always welcome to send these questions to prd support@faa.gov, right? We can always happy to take your questions there. So this webinar file, like this presentation, the slides, will be posted in a few days at prd.faa.gov. And that way you can go in there, and if you want to download the slides, you can have them. And then we'll also post the recording of this webinar on YouTube. If you haven't seen that yet, we have a collection of not every single webinar, but most of the webinars are available on YouTube, so you can watch them when it's convenient for you. So let's get into some of the content here for today's webinar. So the first thing I want to really explain to you is why you're receiving these requests. That's a common question. People say, why are we getting these and what do we do about it? So we're going to go over why you're getting these requests for records via the PRD. And you may also be receiving still FAA Form 806011 and 11A. So we'll talk about that relationship and how you're supposed to respond to those two things. We'll also show you how to figure out when you actually have an open record request in the PRD system. And then, of course, finally, we'll cover what do you do about it? How do you resolve that request, and essentially, how do you get it to go away, right? So let's start off with why you're getting these record requests in the first place. So I want to give you a little background and a little reminder about the current status of how we share records, between carriers. So you're going to get record requests one of two ways right now. You're either going to get the 8060-11, 11A, which you should be familiar with because we've been using that system. That's the PREA request, right? We've been using that system since, 1997 or so. We've had that system. And remember that PREA is still here and still in effect. And it is here until September 2024. So use of the 11 and 11A will continue until September 2024. So don't be surprised, at that one. The other way that you can get record requests is via the PRD. Now, that one will become primary in September 2024, because what's going to happen is in September 2024, PREA will sunset and the use of the 8060-11, 11A will go away. And you'll focus, for reasons I'll explain here in just a minute, you'll be able to not have to deal with that form anymore. So I do want to talk about what you do today if you are still receiving the 8060-11 and 11A. By the way, sometimes I call it just the 11 and sometimes I call it the 11A. And really, I mean that interchangeably. So don't let that throw you. So if you get an 8060-11, from a hiring operator today, then you can still respond to that request as you have since 1997. You basically, let's say you can photocopy the records. You can stick them in an envelope and you can mail them off just like you've done. Okay, so that's option one. Or if you prefer, you can instead report those pilot records to the PRD system. And some folks might prefer that because you might say, well, I have to report these records to PRD anyway. It's just a date in the future, right? It's not that far off, really. Depends on the deadline and such, but you're going to have to report that to PRD anyway at some point. So you could just kind of push ahead and report that pilot's records today, and then you'd have it done. You wouldn't have to fuss with it in the future. And that would save you having to photocopy them all up and mail them off to the requester. So it's kind of your choice. Just like always under PREA, you have 30 days to respond to a PREA request for records. So if you get that -11, you still have to respond within 30 days. So, but this presentation, although we kind of can't help but talk about the -11 in this discussion, it's really going to focus on the requests you're getting in the PRD system. So again, why are you getting these requests? So really what's happening is an operator is considering hiring a pilot who you used to employ, right? That's why they're asking for records, because they're required to collect the records from you as a previous employer. Now, there's one of two ways probably that they even figured out to contact you. So one way is you have entered employment records for that pilot in PRD. So that's a pretty clear indicator to the hiring operator that, okay, they used to work for this operator. And the other reason, if you haven't entered any records to PRD, it means the pilot told them. The pilot's required to tell them, right? The pilot's required to give a 5-year history. So the pilot listed you and they sent you a record. Of course, right now we're in this transition from away from PREA and over to PRD. So, PRD does not have all of the applicable historical pilot records for every pilot in the system. So we don't anticipate being to that state until September 2024. So because we don't have all the historical records, there's going to be a lot of records that people have to request either through a -11, or they may send you a request via the PRD system, which we'll look at that. Another reason that you get requests is because there's a group of operators, we call them the PAC group, and we'll talk about them a fair amount today. But the PAC group is a group of operators that they don't have to automatically report all these pilot records. They can report pilot records, or they can opt to just hold on to them for 5 years and report them when someone asks for them. So particularly if you are a PAC operator, and I'll define that in just a minute. If you are one of these PAC operators, you can expect to get a request for pilot records, especially if you've decided not to enter them ahead of time. Okay, so that's another reason that you'll be getting these requests for records. So just a reminder, we have two broad types of records in PRD. We have historical pilot records, and we have what we call new pilot records. And historical pilot records are records, I have a slide for this in a second, but they're records dated basically June 2022 and before. Well, those records are not reportable to PRD until June 2023. So we have about, I guess, 8 months or so to go before we hit that first due date. And then there's another due date for historical records for September 2024. And that's basically got to do with how recent the record is. But I don't want to go into that detail here. I don't want to overcomplicate the discussion. But because these historical records aren't due until, either next year or even the year after, that's why there's these missing records. And that's why people have to ask for them. Okay. So yeah, it's kind of obvious because of this schedule, you may not yet have reported pilot records that doesn't have all them. And there's the reminder, just so you have it, what records considered historical, what's records dated before June 10th, 2022. Now, the other class of records, new pilot records, you may remember, are reportable within 30 days. And that was as of June 10, 2022. With the exception, of course, is the PAC group. Those folks don't have to report all the records. There's some that they do, but generally speaking, they can just hold on to them and report them when someone asks. Okay, that's basically what the last bullet point says. So by September 2024, this landscape will get easier. This whole record request thing and why I'm getting all these requests, it will simplify in September 2024, because by that date, all the applicable historical pilot records should be in the system. So there shouldn't be a need for future employers to request older historical pilot records because they should already be in the PRD system. So that will really help a lot. And then the new pilot records, because those are reportable within 30 days, unless you're in the PAC group, they're basically always within 30 days of currency is the general idea of it. Okay, so we really think this complicated landscape of record requests will simplify come September 24. So at that point, the PRIA system will sunset and the use of the 8060-11 and 11A goes away. Those forms will be withdrawn by the agency and will no longer be in use because that statute sunsets. Okay, so you'll only be requesting records from within the PRD system. And for now, especially, you already know this if you were in our last webinar about how to request records, we clarified that for now, until the transition is complete, we need people to keep using that 8060-11 11A to keep requesting records. And so that's really the primary method. But which means on the flip side, you'll keep seeing, you're going to keep getting these -11s and 11As. And you may also keep getting these record requests in PRD. It kind of depends on what the requesting operator does, if they hit the button or they don't hit the button, but okay. Okay, and just as a reminder, I know I've already said this like 2 or 3 times, but it's an important point. If you get a request under PRIA, which means you get a -11 or 11A, you can return the records outside of PRDs just as you've always done. Or if you prefer to go ahead and push up that reporting due date, then you can go ahead and report those records to PRD. It's kind of up to you, okay? Part 111 has due dates as to when historical records are due, and that schedule does not change just because you get an electronic record request from PRD, okay? And again, I've said that, I think, many times, that the PRIA, that stuff goes away September 24th. So here's the reminder about the PAC group, if you're curious, who exactly is that? So, just the thing to remember is that the PAC group, which for clarification, those are operators conducting public aircraft operations or air tour operations and corporate operators. So that's the PAC. The PAC group can either report new pilot records within 30 days, just like everybody else, or they can elect to hold on to those records for 5 years. And if they get a request via the PRD system, they then have 14 days, they have 2 weeks to respond to that request. And that requirement is effective today. It's been effective since June. So for the PAC group, if they have elected not to report records and they get a request via the PRD system, Part 111 does require a response within 14 days to provide those outstanding records. Okay. So kind of wrapping this part up, during the transition period, only the PAC group is required to respond within 14 days to an electronic PRD request. Everyone else that reports records, they have to respond to the -11 within 30 days, and they may decide to advance that historical record reporting up a bit and report them now into PRD if they wish, but they don't have to do that. Okay. And kind of in closing here, don't be surprised, especially between now and September of 2024, if you're getting both 8060-11s, as well as electronic requests for records via the PRD system. Okay, so let's go ahead and change our direction a bit, since we've kind of got that broad background hopefully behind us, and let's talk about how you actually facilitate this in the PRD system. You know, what it looks like, and how do you know if you have records and that sort of thing. So there's two broad types of record requests. They can either request any outstanding pilot records. That's kind of a broad category. It just basically means any pilot records that you're required to report to PRD, but you haven't, kind of for whatever the reason. If you haven't reported them, they're now due. Okay, so that's the first type. And the other type of record request that they can make is for supporting documents, and we'll talk about the differences there. So again, outstanding record is just anything that you would normally report to PRD, but you've not done so. So supporting documents is kind of a different animal. And it only relates to disciplinary records and employment records. As you might know, as an employer, when you're reporting those two types of records into PRD, let's say you're entering an employment record. Let's say you had an employee that retired, okay? And so you make that record in PRD that says on this date, the employee retired. If there's relevant documents around that activity, and there may or may not be, but if there are, you have a little checkbox that says essentially relevant documents exist, and you check that box. And then what happens on the flip side is the future employer, they look at your record that you made and they see that supporting relevant documents exist, and they have a way to easily request those supporting documents. Okay, so that's provided for by Part 111. The thing is that those supporting documents cannot be reported directly to PRD. So you have to exchange those outside the PRD system. Okay. We'll look at a sample of that, by the way, in just a minute. So how do you know as an operator if you have any of these outstanding requests? Well, there's a couple main ways. The first way is the system does send nightly summary emails. So here's kind of a sample page of what it might look like. It basically has a table and it gives you a little summary. It's not really maybe enough information here to actually process the request because they don't give you the pilot name, for example, but it just lets you know about the existence, right? The existence of these outstanding requests. Okay, so that's one way, is you get these emails. The other way, and probably the most surefire way, is to check at prd.fa.gov via the tools menu. And I'm going to show you how to do that, how you log in, and you can check for the status of any open requests. So that's basically what we're going to do here in our screenshot. In our webinar, we're going to show you what it looks like and how you process some of those requests. So this is what the web page looks like at prd.fa.gov. Of course, you would click on the tools button, and then you would log in through My Access. By the way, this is the role that you have to do this is either responsible person or an authorized contributor. If you can report pilot records, you have access to this as well. Also applies to proxy authorized contributors as well. So the page that first opens when you log in, here's a sample on the screen, is called the dashboard. And this is a reasonably new software release. So if you're not used to seeing this, then you should go log into the tools menu and check it out. But this is the first page that opens. And you can see it has a summary section where it shows you how many open record requests that you have. So that's a pretty straightforward way to look at it. It also includes overdue record requests. Remember, an overdue record request from PRD perspective is 14 days. Okay, so that's where this is, that's when the system decides to move it from just a record request to an overdue request is after 14 days. Okay, so that's one way to see. Now, these are clickable links. So like where it says open record request, you can click that and it will open a page like this. It opens just below that dashboard where you can actually see more details about the two open requests. So you can see here, there's two requests, both for some guy named Chris Morris. Okay, but there's two requests here. So what this means is that the company at the very far right, which says test applicant, that's just a testing company that we use in the system. It means that that company is considering hiring Chris Morris, and they have sent you a request for pilot records. So that's what, just to kind of clarify the land here. So what you can do at this point is you can just check whichever one of the boxes that you wish to look at in more detail, and then you can click view, the view edit button, and it'll open some more of the detail about the request. And it looks like this. And you can see it gives you the pilot's name. It gives you the type of request. Really, the thing that you're going to look for is this, where it says action, and it says requesting all outstanding records. So, that's pretty much a blanket request, right? We discussed it a little bit ago. So this just means, it means that the hiring employer has a reason to believe that you have more records. Okay. And we'll talk about how you can signal that, no, PRD is up to date. Don't ask me for records. It's done. Okay. But it means this company feels like you may have pilot records for Chris Morris and you have not yet reported them to PRD. And they're basically saying, hey, we need the records. We need you to get in there and report those. Now, remember, if you are in the PAC group, it means you have 14 days to respond to this request. If you're not in the PAC group today, then it's sort of optional. You can elect to go ahead and load those records, or you can wait until they send you an 8060-11, right? Which we're instructing them to also send you. So you'll get a PRIA request for the same pilot. It's kind of up to you if you want to respond via PRD or if you want to respond via PRIA. It's kind of your choice right now. And after September 2024, it really shouldn't be an issue for you non-PAC folks anyway, because the system should be up to date within 30 days. So we don't really expect you non-PAC folks to have to deal with a bunch of record requests after September 2024. So another way to see if you have open requests is you can go to the record request menu. So here's the menu, what it would look like, and you click where it says record request, and that opens, it's a similar page as the dashboard, but this one lets you search for record requests, and which is really handy. I'm not going to go into great detail on searching, but if you say look for any requests that are still requested, so they're open essentially, and then you hit the search button, then you'll get the list, right, of all of the open requests that have not yet been closed. So that's another way to do it. And you can get to the exact same editing screen. I didn't really show it here, but you can still check either of those two check boxes, and there's a view button down below it, and you can hit that and you'll see basically the exact same screen. So a couple different ways to tell. So now that you see you have these open requests, in this example, we have at least a couple here that I've shown you on screen. So once you figure out, yep, okay, I got these open requests, now what do I do about it? Okay, it's actually pretty straightforward. We don't go into great detail in this webinar about the reporting piece of it, so we have other webinars that we've already held about how to report pilot records. So if you need help in that aspect about actually getting the records in the system, then go check out that other webinar that goes into more detail. So what do you do about it? Well, if you're a PAC operator, you report the applicable pilot records that you have been holding on to for 5 years per Part 111. Okay, so you report the pilot records within 14 days, And then you do want to close this request, and I'll show you how to close it. It's really straightforward. All the other folks that have to report pilot records, but you're not a PAC operator, so you're not public aircraft, you're not air tour, and you're not corporate, then this is where you have the choice, right? Before September 2024, you can go ahead and report the pilot records now into PRD if you wish. Or you can stick with the Part 111 reporting schedule, which is defined by Part 111. And just know that you're also going to get an 8060-11 requesting these same records. You know, you're going to get that until September 2024. You can expect that. So after September 2024, we expect that all the historical records will be up to date. So you really, as a non-PAC group, you really shouldn't have any historical records that you have not yet reported. If you happen to have stuff that you haven't yet reported, then you'll want to get it in there to satisfy this request. So otherwise, you should already be good to go. So let's talk about how you actually close the request. Okay, so in our scenario, we've already reported the records as we needed to do so. So here's the, well, I already say report all the outstanding records. So let's go ahead and see, well, yeah, I don't want to jump ahead too far. So I do want to cover here at this point, there is a place where, as someone who's entering pilot records, you can indicate to potential employers that PRD is up to date. And we covered this in the previous webinar, but I just want to mention it here because if you enter a bunch of pilot records because you got a request for it, you also want to make sure that you do this so you don't keep getting requests from maybe other employers or whatever for this pilot. Okay, so we'll look at the example. So this is what the screen looks like when you are reporting a pilot's employment record. So you can see here, this is an employment record for myself that was reported by this fake company, test applicant, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But the thing I want you to look at is the company did not enter a date where it says PRD records complete date. They left that blank. When they originally made this employment record, you know, they entered my date of hire and they entered my separation date, but they did not enter anything for PRD records complete. That's really most likely why you got a request for these records anyway, because without entering a date here, it signals to others looking at this record that you have entered some records, but you haven't finished. It's basically what it means, right? Because if you have a whole lot of historical records and you're trying to enter them into the system, it could take you some time, right? We could be talking about thousands of records for some people. So it won't happen all at one go, right? So you enter some, the next week you do some more, whatever. But that's why. So what I'm going to show you here is that you can edit that. You can enter a date there, and then people will leave you alone. So the way you do that is you select the checkbox next to the pilot you want to edit, and then you hit the edit button. And the thing that you want to change or enter is the complete date. So this was probably blank before. It was blank. We just looked at it. So you'll enter the complete date. And again, what that means is that as of, in this example, October 14, as of October 14, all the records in PRD are up to date. That's basically what it says. And of course, you know, next spring, if this still says October, you're probably going to get some record requests because now you're several months behind, right? Is kind of how people interpret that. So there is a case where the pilot maybe doesn't work for you anymore. The pilot left and you're not generating any more records. So it doesn't make sense to have to come in here and update the complete date, say monthly, when the pilot isn't there. There are no new records. So that's what the final records date is for. So if you have a pilot that you've entered all the records and the pilot no longer works for you, there's no more records being created, then you'll want to put a date there as well, the final records complete date. And then that way, as far as this pilot's concerned, you don't have to revisit PRD for this pilot again. You can put a pin in it because you're done. And then future employers will see that. They'll see that PRD is up to date. Here's a final date. It basically tells future employers, don't ask me for records. PRD is current. You have everything that you're supposed to have. So that's it. Okay. So you update those dates and then you just click update and it'll save that in the system. But anyway, so now that we have updated all the records, this is the actual request, right, that we looked at up front. So let's go over how you close these requests. It's pretty straightforward. So you do have some drop-down boxes with a few choices in here. I just want to kind of talk about them a little bit. So in completion status, you have two choices. You have yes and no. No matter what you pick, it will still close the request, which is, I know, a little bit. You might say, but I said no on completion status. Well, what no means is you did not report any records, but you still want to close the request. And this might be appropriate sometimes. So if you say yes, that just means that you completed the request. It also kind of implies that you reported some records. If you say no, then you're basically saying, I didn't do what you asked, but I still want to close this request. And you'll want to explain in the comments, why you didn't provide any records. And maybe it's something as simple as all records previously provided, or records mailed via PRIA, or, just kind of whatever is appropriate. There's a completion date. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Just put the date that you close the request in there. And then there is a document sent option. And basically what this is for is it's asking, well, how did you send the information? And this just goes back to the requester. So the requester knows, it helps give them some information about where they should expect to see those records. And your choices are emailed, faxed, mailed, reported to PRD. That's a good one. Or other. You can pick other. And then you can just describe in the comments, what that's about. So there's really very little validation in this form. In other words, PRD doesn't really check. Like if you say that you completed the record, PRD is not going to go look and say, well, did you report any records? It's not going to do that. It's just, it takes it at face value. Okay. Which is, I think, good. And then you, so to actually close this sample one, you see, I just filled out completion status. Yes, I put the date as 10/14. And then I said that I reported the documents to PRD, and then I just click save. And then you get a confirmation message that looks like this. And now if we look at the dashboard, you can see I have one less open record request. I had two. Now I'm down to one. And it also says close record request 1. So there you go. So, while reporting the records might be a little bit, that's a different kettle of fish, right? The act of actually closing this request is really very straightforward. We do still have one to deal with, and that's, we still have one open request, and we'll go ahead and process that together here just to kind of see it again. So again, I can click on the open record request button and I get the same form again. It's a nice, easy way to get to it. And this is actually a duplicate request because it's the same pilot, it's me, and it's coming from the same previous employer, right? It's the same. So if you happen to see this, and it is possible that people can send a duplicate request, and I won't bore you with the details of why that's possible, although the system does try to prevent it. There is a way that they can make duplicate requests. Hopefully they won't do that to you very often, but if it happens, that's why I wanted to show it. Okay, so in this example, I would say completion status, no, because I didn't do anything different here. And I put document sent, I said other, and then I just explained in the comments that this was a duplicate request. And then you just click save. And that'll take you back to, 0 open record request. So the other thing I wanted to show you is the piece about the supporting documents that I mentioned earlier in the webinar. How does someone request those, and what's it look like, and how do you resolve that? Especially considering that's not something that you report to PRD. So in this example, this is an open record request. Again, it's for me as the pilot, and it's coming from that test applicant company. And you see, instead of it saying requesting all outstanding records, this one says requesting employment separation documents. So that's basically how you tell. You just have to go look and see what the action is. And that way you know what they're asking for. And just a reminder, supporting documents, you don't report those to PRD. There's no way to get them in the system. They have to be shared outside PRD. So you would, scan them or fax them or whatever method that you think is appropriate. So in this example, again, the action is requesting employment separation documents. And after you bundle up those records and mail them off, for example, then you just close the request. You can see in this example, I said completed status, yes. I put the date and a document sent by the mail. So I put mail in there. And then I commented the tracking number. It's just an example. They may find that helpful, right? If you tell them how you sent it, so they can be looking for it. It may save you some emails or phone calls with the requesting operator. Then you click save. And again, you get the confirmation message. And now if we look at it, you can see that there are no open record requests here, and there's no open overdue record requests. So, as an employer, we've taken care of that task. We've gotten rid of these, in which case you're sort of off the hook for dealing with these record requests. And then just moving forward, you'll either, you might get an email. You should get an email to the responsible person that tells you, hey, you've got these pending requests. Or you can just log in as a contributor or a responsible person. You can log in and you can see on this page what the status is. You might be curious how many of these open requests exist in the system today, system-wide. I thought you might find that interesting, so I looked it up. We should have done like a quiz where you guys could throw us some numbers, but I didn't do that. I just looked this up just a minute ago, but it's really not too bad. Industry-wide, there's about 80 open record requests. So I don't think that's horrible when you consider there are thousands of operators, using PRD. So to only have 80, I don't think so bad. And we do have about 40 additional overdue record requests. And again, to PRD, that means 14 days. Okay. Anyway, I throw that number out there really just kind of for fun, and maybe to motivate you to go check your own and see if you have any of these open record requests, especially now that we've kind of talked about it, and maybe now you sort of know how to deal with them. Of course, the answer is different whether you're in the PAC group or you're not in the PAC group, but we can also check that we don't have any open requests by going to the record request menu, just like we did the first time. You can do a search by requested records and you'll see, no data found. And of course, this is where you could switch it and say, well, show me all of the closed requests, and it would show you all the ones that you've processed. You can search by pilot. You can search by, the date or whatever. So hopefully that's useful to you. So kind of in summary here, You want to keep an eye out for your open requests. The email hopefully will indicate, but if for some reason you're not getting those emails, then you'll want to be checking in with the PRD website. It's probably the best way to do it. Of course, to just report the records as appropriate and then close that request to signal to the requesting company that you got it wrapped up. And remember, until September 2024, you're still going to be receiving the 8060-11 and 11A, and you still have to respond to those just like before. PREA is still here. It's still US law. We still have to play along with that game. Just the only thing that's different right now is that if you get that -11, you can, mail those off like you always have, or fax or email, whatever you prefer to do, or you can report those records to PRD ahead of the schedule listed in Part 111. That's another choice. So we do have another webinar coming up. It's December 1st, and it's going to be about reporting drug and alcohol records. So we're going to have the assistance of the Drug Abatement Division on that one, because as you probably know, they control policy for drug and alcohol reporting. It's just, and then, our office does kind of the technical side of how do you actually report those. But so that'll be kind of a group webinar. So that'll be good. Hopefully that'll be good, useful information. And of course, go to prd.fa.gov to see, the webinars and things. So we do have about 15 minutes or so to take questions. I think I'm going to ask Stacy to see if we have any questions and let her pick out a couple, and then we'll try and answer them here live. Stacy, do you have any questions for us?
Hey, Chris. Yes, we do have a couple of questions, and we have a few questions around how to handle the situation where if you receive a -11 and request in PRD. So to provide some clarification, records provided with let's see, in accordance with PREA, if they receive the -11, must they respond to the request, and in addition, if they've also received the request in PRD?
Yeah, it's a great question, and like I mentioned, it's been a very popular question, and I can certainly see why. It's confusing. Before PRD, we knew how to handle this. You get a -11, and you photocopy these records and you mail them off. But now we have PRD. It's a little bit confusing. So I may have answered it in the webinar. I tried to, but let me just reiterate the response a little bit. So if you are, let's say you're an air carrier, because this makes it a little bit easier. If you're a 135 operator or 121, because you were covered under PREA, to request these records. And of course, if you get a -11, you have to respond to it. So if you get a -11 today, you do have to respond within 30 days. That's the statute. And your options of response are, you can either respond the way you have since 1997. You can photocopy the records, photocopy them, scan them, whatever. You can basically provide them outside of PRD. So you can send the records over. The other choice that you have is, instead of providing the records in PRD today, on the basis of this request, is you can enter them into the PRD system today, a little early. Okay, so that's kind of your choice. If you do that, that has a couple benefits, because if you go ahead and report those records to PRD, even though technically you maybe weren't going to report them until June of next year, or maybe even September of 24, if you go ahead and report them, you can indicate in the PRD system that for that pilot, the records are up to date. And so that may help you in the future with other requests from other employers for the same pilot, because you've already done that work, and then if you get that request in PRD, then your choice is to, if you're not a PAC operator, then the request really doesn't require you to take action until they also send you the -11. We would obviously recommend that you go ahead and act on it, go ahead and provide those records into the system. But we're informing those requesting employers that they need to send you that -11. So you're probably going to get both. You're going to get the -11, you're going to get the request in PRD. So just respond to the -11, and then you can, when you close out the request in PRD, because I'm sure you don't want it open. No one likes those open activities that say overdue request. No one likes that. So for sure, go ahead and close it. And you could just say, provided records under PREA, or, whatever's appropriate, and you can close that and get rid of it. So I hope that helps answer that question. What else do you have in there, Stacy?
We have a couple of people asking when relevant supporting documents are requested by an outside company, where do I find their contact information, email, mailing address, etc.?
That's a great question. Very good question. There is a directory function in the, I should have had a screenshot of it, but I'm sorry I didn't. But there's a directory function in PRD. It's on the top of the menu button. So you can look up those employers and it will give you their mailing address and stuff. That's a great point. I don't think it dawned on me that's that scenario. So, we'll mark that down for review, because it would be very handy if we just included that for you automatically, so that's a great comment. But the short answer is I would use the directory at the top of the menu, and then you can look them up.
Okay. I have another question here from Jeff at American Airlines asking if you can simply close the request in PRD and ask them to send an 8060-11 instead of waiting to see if they send one.
You could, yeah, you could certainly close that request as a no. When it says completed yes or no, you could say no, and then you could just put in the comment, maybe expecting 8060-11, however you wish to phrase it. And I think that's probably a perfectly good way to respond to that, because that will signal the requesting company, because they'll get a message that you've closed that request, and then they'll be able to see it. So hopefully they've already sent you a -11, because that's the instruction that we give them. But yeah, I think that's fine. Now that doesn't apply if you're in the PAC group. Okay, if you're a PAC operator, Part 111 specifies how you have to respond to that request. And Part 111 says that you have to provide the appropriate pilot records within 14 days. So, so especially after September 24, that scenario wouldn't work for a PAC operator. So anyway, but yeah, I think that works to do it that way.
Okay. Let's see. I have one question up here from Anthony Toro, and he has received several Part 121 certificated companies, 8060-12s, and the FAA suggested background 40.25 form at the same time for one employee. And he would like to know if I complete one or two, isn't this requirement fulfilled, or does he need to fill out both forms for the same employee?
So I think if I understand the question, he's receiving an 8060-12, which is the drug and alcohol record request.
Yes.
So, and he's asking, how do you respond to that? Well, this answer, it is discussed a lot in the AC, but it's helpful to remember that the drug and alcohol requirement to share pilot drug and alcohol records, which is specified in Part 40, that requirement to share those records did not change when Part 111 was published. And so that's one first thing to remember, is that use of the -12 continues. The -12 is still in place, and the -12 is designed to be a convenient way for a hiring employer to request drug and alcohol records from a previous employer who was subject to that DOT testing. Now you might say, but wait, we're reporting those drug and alcohol records to PRD. Why do I still have to make a request via -12 and share these records outside of PRD? And the reason is because when you share the records in accordance with Part 40, you're sharing the actual records, and you're sharing all the records, right, related to drug and alcohol. I'm being kind of careful because 620 is not the drug, and we're not the drug abatement division, right? So I don't want to speak in error for that group for those folks, right? They're specialists of this subject, but I'm trying to give you some useful information. So the PRD does not satisfy Part 40 when it comes to requesting and sharing those drug and alcohol records. So what PRD has done is PRD collects some drug and alcohol records, but not all. For example, PRD does not collect, in most cases, a negative drug test. Or you might want to phrase it and say a satisfactory or a clean drug test. Okay. So there's a couple of exceptions where PRD would collect that, but generally PRD doesn't collect that. So like, for example, if you do a pre-employment drug screen and it comes back clean, those are generally not reported to PRD. Whereas a negative drug test is reportable to PRD. So I illustrate that just to indicate that PRD tends to have, maybe we can call it the more egregious drug and alcohol records, but it doesn't have all of them. And PRD doesn't change anything about Part 40, which requires that you share those documents. So that's a whole lot of explanation, but I'm trying to explain why do you still have the -12 today, and why you're still going to have the -12 after September 2024. I think the form number is going to change because it's not going to say PREA anymore, but you'll still have this basic form that allows you to share these drug and alcohol records between operators in accordance with Part 40. So, man, that was a whole lot of talking. I hope that made sense. But just try and take away that Part 111 did not change Part 40. And you still have to share those drug and alcohol records outside PRD. At the same time, you're reporting some of those records to PRD. So, the existence of those records will be in PRD, and it will be more readily available to hiring employers. But I hope that answered. If that doesn't answer the question, please email us, or maybe more usefully, email the Drug Abatement Division, email Vicki Dunn, and because they're really the experts on that subject, and she can explain it better than I can. What else you got, Stacy?
Okay, thanks, Chris. We do have a couple of questions about reporting records on here. So I can grab about, okay, I have a question from Lorraine here on how should they enter the a check ride with unsatisfactory and retraining, and she wasn't sure if she should enter it as a pass with the retraining notes or a failed followed by a new record of training.
Yeah, I know what she's asking, and good for you, Lorraine, asking that question, because I think it was in my inbox. And I think I saw it in my inbox, and I don't want to tell you how many unread messages are in there after my my 2-week absence from work, but I'm happy to try and answer the question here. So please put a star around everything I'm about to tell you, because your training program may have something else described in it. I'm going to describe kind of some generic policy around check rides and when retraining occurs within a check ride, and kind of how you consider that satisfactory or unsatisfactory. The bottom line, although I'm going to give you an answer and Chris's opinion, the bottom line is you need to consult your approved training program to make, to see how it's to be handled. But generally speaking, if you're, let's say you're conducting a part 135 check ride, you're in a 135 check ride. Let's say you're doing a proficiency check. Most of those are conducted by check pilots, and there's generally a provision that says during the check ride, if the pilot does something that's not to standards, because that check pilot is also an instructor most of the time, you can suspend the check ride, you can conduct training, and then you can resume the check ride. So if the applicant, can't do a certain procedure to standard, then the check pilot may decide to suspend the checking event, do some training, and then resume the checking event. And then the applicant would be expected to perform the procedure to standard. Most of the training programs that I've seen in those cases, they allow for you to indicate on the form that retraining occurred. But at the end of the day, you're not marking an unsatisfactory for the event, for the check ride event in total. So like the proficiency check would be recorded as satisfactory. You would just see, if you looked at it, you would see a note that said retraining occurred, in slow flight, or, whatever. So, and again, my big caveat, Lorraine, is this really depends on the individual approved training program. So if what I'm telling you doesn't match your training program, you got to defer to the training program. But generally what that means is that for recording purposes in PRD, because when they finished the event and they got back to the base, they landed, and the check pilot is filling out the form, you normally won't see a proficiency check recorded as unsatisfactory, and then another proficiency check recorded as satisfactory. There may be some training programs that require that, but generally you won't see it that way. So I think the safe answer is whatever form that you have in that pilot's training record is what you report. So if there's a single proficiency check there that says you did a proficiency check in the Hawker on this date, and the bottom line says satisfactory, then that's what you report in PRD. If you have two proficiency checks on the same date, and one of them says proficiency check in the Hawker unsatisfactory, and then you have another one that says satisfactory, if that's the way that the check pilot recorded it, then that's what you would report in PRD. You would report both of those in PRD. So I hope that answers the question. I appreciate you asking it here, since you couldn't get me on email. But thanks. I think we might be out of time, Stacy, so we probably should wrap up there. So, just as a reminder, any outstanding questions that we haven't answered, we'll try to respond to you by email in the next few days. And if you don't get a response from us, then, for sure, email your question into prd.support@fa.gov so we can try and help you out. But I think with that, we'll wrap up the webinar, and thank you all for attending, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.